10 days left until Christmas. So the countdown is on. There's lots of things to do. There's kids that are finishing up their semesters, there are gifts to buy, plans to finalize. There's a lot to do before January 25th, the day that we celebrate Christmas, the day that we celebrate Jesus' birth. And I don't know if you're like me. If you are like me, you have lots of checklists to get through, lots of things to accomplish. And the days in which you have things to get done are getting less. So I love checklists. I live by checklists. It helps me feel accomplished when I'm able to make it through. And a successful day for me is when I'm able to get a lot of things done, checked off my checklist. But the enemy of checklists is the real world. And it's interacting with real people, because in the real world there are real problems. There's things that break, there's cars that get flat tires, there are cell phones that lose their charge. And in the real world there's real people. And with real people, when you ask that question, how's it going, things may not always be good. And when you're asking someone how's it going, and you sense that hesitation, the you sense that things may not actually be good, that things may not actually be going well. And there's that hesitation, because for them to open up right now, well, that would slow you down. That would slow you down, and they're sure that you probably have that long list of things to get done. So what do you do when you ask that question and you sense that pause? When we read the gospel accounts of the life of Jesus, we'll notice that he took time for people. Don't get me wrong, he knew about work. He was all about work. I mean, he's the one that said, I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. I mean, Jesus knew about work. We get glimpses of that when he worked himself to exhaustion, and so much so that he'd take naps when he could, even if that meant in the bow of a boat during the middle of a storm. But he knew about getting things done. But Jesus had time for people, even with his busyness. He had time to stop and to be with people, to even empathize with people, to feel for them, to carry their burdens. Jesus had time for empathy. And we read about this in the Gospel of John when he went to raise his friend Lazarus from the dead. We talked about this a couple Sundays ago. He got to the town of Bethany, where Lazarus' sisters came out to see him, to see Jesus. And they had spent 4 days mourning for their brother. They were a mess. They got to Jesus. Mary threw herself at his feet. And verse 33 of chapter 11 of the Gospel of John tells us that, therefore, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping, he groaned in his spirit and was troubled. A verse later, in verse 35, it's the shortest verse in the whole Bible. It says Jesus wept. He had time for empathy. Not only did he take time to slow down for people, he took time to share in their burdens, share in how they were feeling, to be empathetic. As we ask God into our heart, we call that the moment of salvation, as we ask him to give us a new heart, to trade our old heart of stone for his heart. What kind of heart do you think that he'll give us? He's going to start to give us the heart of Christ, the heart that he had. Listen to what Paul wrote the Corinthian church in his second letter to them. In chapter 5, verses 14 and 15, he says, "For the love of Christ compels us." This is Christ's love coming through our hearts, or through the heart that he gave us. For the love of Christ compels us. It continues, because we judge thus, that if one died for all, then all died. And he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and rose again. So the love of Christ compels us, his love in us. And so it goes from the heart, his heart. Now it moves to the mind. It says, because we judge. Judging doesn't come necessarily from the heart, from the emotions, but from our reason, from our minds. Now Now we're not only having the heart of Christ compelled by his love, but also our minds are involved. That if we reason that if he's living in us, we no longer live for ourselves, according to our lists, according to our plans, according to our goals, but we actually begin to live for him. When we choose to follow Jesus, there's a transformation of the mind involved from our old way of doing things, from our old selves, with ourselves in the center of our lives, ourselves in the center of the universe. Listen to what Paul writes in Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 5. He says, Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not for your own interests, but also for the interests of others. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Looking out not only for your own interests, but for the interests of others, taking time to be involved in others' lives. Galatians 6:2 says we should bear one another's burdens, so fulfilling the law of Christ. Or again in Romans 12:15, when Paul tells us we are to rejoice with those who rejoice, to weep with those who weep, to have time, to be available, to weep, to hurt with others. That's how we see Jesus when he got to Bethany and was confronted by Mary. This is how we are to live. So may God bless you this day as you open your hearts and your minds to him, so that you can love the world, so that he can love the world through your heart.